Okay. Hey, this is Chris at Art Secret Studio, and I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about fat over lean. Fat over lean is so confusing. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I'll tell you, I spend 1 or 2 or 4 days a year researching this for no answers. It is so confusing. So I want to share with you some of the things that I understand about fat over lean. And before we get into different mediums, I just want to talk about paint itself and the proportions of oil that's in paint. All oil paint has oil in it. Do you need to take notes?
I'm good so far.
Okay, I'm done with the talk. Okay, so here's the actual talk now. So let me explain it this way. Okay? If I take a glob of paint, that's an art term, and I take a thick glob of paint and I make a stroke of thick paint just like this, okay, there's oil holding up. So this is my oil mark. There's oil, and the little dots are the particles of paint. So when they make paint, it's nothing but dirt. Sometimes it's a leaf, sometimes it's a semi-precious stone. But what paint is these organic and inorganic materials, and they grind it up into small particles, and they mix it to an oil. And the difference between paint, oil paint, and watercolor is they use like linseed oil or safflower oil in the oil paint, and that suspends it. So it's like Jell-O. If you dropped a bunch of dirt in Jell-O, then in the Jell-O you would have dots of pigment. If you did a microscope of what I have there, that's what you would see. Okay? You would see through the oil, and you see these little dots of dirt floating around. Okay? So that's how that works. Now, here's the next thing that happens though. So all tubes of paint are basically anywhere from 48 to 52% pigment or oil in ratio. Could be 48% pigment, 52 oil, or vice versa, something like that. So a tube of paint is a bunch of dirt filled with oil, and they grind it together, and it floats together like Jell-O. And it dries like Jell-O. Does that make sense? Okay? That's not the fat over lean part I want to talk about, but that's basically how it works. Now, because of that, the top diagram with the pink is the oil, and the dots are the pigment. The finer the pigment, the more transparent the color is. It never dissolves completely like you'd think food coloring. There's always little particles floating around in this oil. Just how it works. The bigger the dots, the second dot, second box, is what we call semi-transparent. An opaque layer is when the dots are so big, it's hard for the light to go between all the dots, but there's still oil suspending it. All right, that's the anatomy of it. So basically, the chart on the left shows light going through the pink and over the orange. And as I look at that, I'm going to get to my talk in a second. So if I have pink and it's going over the yellow, you see orange. Optically, you see what's through it because you can see through the color. So you think in combos. So this is yellow, you see blue, you'd see green. And then if this was green and this is blue, you'd see blue-green. So whatever color you're wearing a mustard yellow. If I take red, red and yellow make some kind of brownish purple. If I want it to be green though, yellow and what make green? Blue. So I would glaze blue to make my green. You have to think in combos when glazing. So all color is transparent. But that is the beauty of color, and it's the problem of color. So now let's get to today's talk. Okay? today's talk, when you thin it too much, you're going to leave just dirt, and there's no oil to hold it and suspend it in place. So you can't thin the paint too much without adding something to it. So let me kind of go over this, and we're almost done. So as I thin my stroke out, and I make it thinner, and it's not as thick, there's less oil. So you see how far the pigment and the particles are floating in this jello, okay, food coloring that has frozen. As it gets thinner and thinner, there's less and less oil. And I'm going to actually take some of that off. Okay. Same color thinned down. But what's happening okay, there's no oil in this. And there's a point where if there's not enough oil, you just have the dirt from Siena, Italy, sitting on the surface. You add the brush cleaner so it runs. When the brush cleaner evaporates, nothing's holding the dirt together, and then it falls. So if you thin the paint too much, you don't have any oil in it. And the oil's the glue in the art world we call binder. Well, in art, they want to say fat over lean. The more oil in the paint takes longer to dry, and you don't want the color drying the fastest on top because it forms a film and the other color underneath is not dry yet, it's wiggling. And then when the top color dries, it cracks. Okay, you want the bottom color to dry quickly. Well, the manufacturer has taken a lot of bit of care to knowing what's the percentage of oil to pigment based on the inherent drying time of that pigment. Alizarin crimson and satin green takes weeks to dry. And yellow ochre, Naples yellow, raw umber, a lot of the earth tones, burnt umber, man, they dry overnight or in 2 days. So in the old masters, they would have to say, okay, certain colors dry at a certain time, and they would have to say, all the fast drying colors go first. I don't care if your painting's about blue. We have to put in everything burnt umber, everything raw umber, and everything yellow ochre today, so that concrete of that house is formed and dries hard, and then we'll put another color that dries a little slower tomorrow on top. Because the wiggliest part has to be on top. That's an art term. Okay? But here's what happens. And we all know this, or you've heard it or something like it. Now, the fat over lean really means, so if I had dry pigment on my glass, and an old master would make up a number, 3 drops of oil to it, mix it with a little stick, and just kind of grind it into the oil, make it all part of it, and now you have oil paint. Well, eventually, the next day, instead of 3 dots, fat over lean, you might do 5 dots of oil that you mix to the paint. And the next day, they might do 8 drops of oil. And the more oil, the longer it takes to dry. So the slowest drying part of this process is on top. But here's the problem nobody tells you. The word fat over lean is a little different today because there's 30, 40, 50 different mediums, all made out of different things. Oleo gel, stand oil, linseed oil, Velasquez medium, neomegalip, you name it, Galkit, transparent something, base. There's just every company has 4, 5, 6, 8 mediums. 10 companies, that's 50. They all have different things in it. They all dry at different times. When you're adding it to different colors, like alizarin and sap green or raw umber, and it is so confusing. I do this for a living. I've done it my whole life, and I'm looking out there thinking, what the heck is going on here? So let me explain it a different way. It's proportioned. Fat over lean first starts with no medium in it. If I have a lot of paint in it, this is how it was intended. These two are really how the oil painting company and chemists said, this amount of pigment has a certain amount of oil in it. That's how it came out of the tube. And this will dry in a healthy manner. And if you never use a medium in your life, and you just paint with paint out of the tube, you'll be just fine. And you don't have to worry about fat over lean. Except if you thin it out, you've removed the oil that's holding the paint together that gets it to dry at a certain time. Does that make sense? And the more you thin it out, the more you messed it up. So as you thin it out, you have to start using a glaze or some kind of medium. And that's a different talk. I'm just talking about no paint. So what's another way that you might be shocked that this happens? So I'm going to add a little white. And this is for people who mix their palettes with a paintbrush and not a palette knife. So if I take this paint right here, okay, and I just take my brush and I add a little white to it, that's fine. There's enough paint on my brush when I make a mark that has oil in it and it will dry correctly. But here's what I notice with the class. There are misers in the room. I've seen you. Oh, I didn't mean to make eye contact. No names. Misers in the room, okay? You want to save money.
You're thinking of Bill.
I'm thinking of Bill, yes. You know, I keep forgetting Bill's colorblind. He has done fantastic.
Yeah, he really has.
He has learned how to paint at a high level. And now and then, last night I kept saying, gosh, Bill, there's something funny about your painting. Where's the green that goes here? And then I realized it's Bill. But he does so well, I keep forgetting he's colorblind. It's amazing. And then I keep forgetting 90% of my exercises are red and green, and 90% of the people who are colorblind are red and green colorblind. It's a different problem. And that has nothing to do with the talk. I'm ADD, leave me alone. Okay, so here's what happens now, Bill. Okay, and it's not Bill, it's Robert. Okay, so Robert starts running out of paint. Uh-oh. You see, that's not this. And if you run out of, or maybe you're working on your painting and you want to just lightly add a little to go over it, and you're just going to lightly just kind of go over some of it like this. Okay? I have changed the amount of oil in the pigment. And here's what's happened. Less oil, faster it dries. And you're putting it over the top. No, that can go on the bottom, but not the top. When you need to do that and refine something, you have to dip into some oil to do it for you. Now that has white in it, so it has to be oleo gel, and sometimes add a little Galkit so it helps it dry. But you have to have something in it. You can't just thin it out and put it on top. Oh no, I'm sorry. Yes, you can. I don't recommend it, miser. So you have to mix paint. So what happens when artists are mixing paint with their brush, they're just taking paint and they're mixing it like this, and eventually they don't have enough and they thin it out and you see the glass through it. When you see the glass through it, you've got problems. You have cracking written all over it. Not the first day or the second day of painting. But if you've been working on this for 3-4 weeks or 2-3 weeks and you keep going over it, you're now putting paint with no oil in it over the top of paint that has oil base. And you got a wiggly oil bottom and you got the dry stuff on top. Look for cracking. And then, heaven forbid, you decide to thin it with brush cleaner because that looks like it's fine. The problem is turpentine, mineral spirits, it's going to evaporate. And you know what you end up with? You end up with dirt falling off the canvas. I actually put glaze over it to hold it in place, kind of seal it there. I don't know how long it'll stay there because there's nothing holding it. You know what I mean? Well, that's fine. But you know, if you hit that chart 5 years from now, it could flake off. And maybe not all of it would flake. And you paint over it and some of it seals, but some parts are loose and that tile could let go. So parts of the painting could flake off. Okay? Okay, I don't care how cheap you are as a person, just not in this classroom. Alan, are you one of those? Tell me it's not so, Alan. Alan, I believe in you. Alan, I understand his problems, but I believe in you. Alan. So I've always mixed with a palette knife. And the reason I mix with a palette knife is for 2 reasons, okay? So let me grab another color. If I'm mixing with my brush, which I do not do. If I mix with a brush, what happens if I need to move me. Please tell me if I get off the chart. Okay, so if you know what I need to do? Before I ruin this chart, I need to take a photo so I can use it. Okay. And you know what I should do? I wonder if I should make this really thick. You know what I mean? As thick as I possibly can. Just so you can see the texture difference. But the truth is, there is a percentage, and once you get to that part, then that's full. Going over it will take longer to dry, but it's not the same. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so here's the problem when you mix with a palette knife. When I take my brown like this and I'm mixing with my knife and I add with the green, so often it just starts destroying the color, and I you know, it's just a mess. And then eventually when I do it here, it's like, oh gosh, the whole thing turns one color. That happens all the time. There's not enough pigment to absorb the green on my brush. But when I mix with a palette knife, I can take my green. I'm on screen, right? Okay, I can take my green, I mix my white to get the color you're seeing. Okay, I actually can make enough. 2 things happen. The first part of this is when I wash my brush, there's fluid on my brush. And then when I touch, it'll make this runny puddle that you can't control your touch. You work so hard in the drawing program here to get to such a high level, and then you're mixing and that's happening. That's not blending on the canvas. You will have no control of your touch. I'm looking at you. Yeah, what made you give you the idea? Okay, so you think I don't know you guys. All right, But when the painting has enough body to the mixture on the canvas, it absorbs the oil in the brush. See, this is the same thing, but yet now I have control of my paint where that I didn't. That's the first reason why I mix it with a palette knife. Okay. The second reason is I need to have control, so I can start taking this color here and I can add a little green to it, and I make another variation with green. And then I can move it, and I don't have enough paint. I would need more. And then I would add more green. And I can make variations of colors. That's a mess, and you really don't get variations. You get one color, okay? So, how do I say this? Fat over lean, without any mediums, without talking about that. That's enough of a nightmare. Just with the pigment that comes out of the tube, you are altering how fat the pigment is and how lean by how much you thin it out. And there's a tolerance that if you go a little too lean, you've gone beyond the threshold and now you're in trouble. Okay? And what is that threshold? It's a male thing. You just feel it. You know, if I load my brush, that's enough paint. Okay? I can do this thickness. See where you can see through it? I can do this thickness on day one when there's no underneath paint. But once there's already paint on the canvas, there's oil in that. And this next layer has to have more oil in it, so it basically has to get a little thicker. Does that make sense? Because some of you, I mean, he's painting his first day of apples. He's doing a fantastic job. I already know they're going to be fantastic. He's going to paint at any level he wants to. I've seen the attitude. I've seen the temperament. He's got the touch. I see the whole package. Obsessive, compulsive. Oh no, that came out wrong. I mean, he does. He really does a great job. But he also could run the risk of saying, oh, I want to make this perfect. You know, I think I'm just going to take a little bit of this color and just ever so slightly kind of put it over it. But that's turpentine. That's going to dry. And over existing paint, that's cracking. Okay, so I've never really explained it this way. I've said stop using brush cleaner to thin your paint. Use a medium. But I didn't realize until asked by some of the advanced classes today, what do I really do and how is that? And I said, oh, this is proportional. And when I scumble and I want to just drag paint over the top, I need white to scumble. Notice the palette knife to mix it. Okay, so imagine I had a painting here and there was already paint on the canvas and I need to grab and just go over the bumps of the canvas. I have to make sure there's enough paint on my brush so when I drag over the top, it's the same thickness, just not everywhere. So those little dots actually have, and I'll zoom in and I'm done. It's thick enough that there's oil in those dots. Does that make sense? Any questions before I wrap it up? Or you're afraid I'll keep going? So see the thickness to the scumbling? It's not thin like over here. Okay? It's minor, folks, but it's your painting. Stop mixing with a palette knife, with a brush, and stop thinning your paint out with brush cleaner, and be aware of how thick is the earlier layer.
It's okay on the wash though, right?
Yeah, the first day I do what's called toning of a canvas.
Yeah, the toning and wash, yeah.
Yeah, the first day I tone a canvas, and if you don't know what that is, toning the canvas is where I just take a paper towel and it's really called staining, and I just kind of rub it. And then I rub it off. The secret is you rub it off. Okay, so now there's not pigment, you've just stained the paper, the canvas, so nothing's gonna fall off. Then that dries, and my next day, I'm on the page, right? Yeah. My next day, I'm taking I'll just take the burnt sienna, and I do it quite often with the darks. I hit the darks, I make it thinner, lighter, and I'm darker, and I'm stronger, and I'm doing this. I can do this on day 1. Okay? Day 2, I need more oil than that. And I don't mean day 2, I mean once you've covered the canvas and it's sealed. So what are some of my habits? Obsessive compulsive, oh no. Some of my habits are Thursday, I have the most wonderful wife. She is so loving, so caring. She is amazing. Gosh, she's the bossiest thing I've ever seen. How can you be that tiny and I have no say in anything in my life? I have to cut this, don't I? No, so what happens is, as you run a business, Thursdays are not a good day for me to paint. I'm off, but I've got a list of things to do. Laundry, grocery shop, clean the bathrooms, mow the lawn, all the manly executive things that somehow I do in our house. But Friday, I'm ready to paint. But that's the problem. I've been waiting all week to paint. I might have a commission I have to work on. There's a deadline. I've got all this stuff. I've got too much energy. Friday's not a good day to finish a painting. I want to cover the canvas. No, Friday's not the day to make 3 strokes and say, am I done? Friday's the day you take a 4-inch brush and you're just covering the canvas and painting. So Fridays are typically start days for me. I'll do 2-3 studies. I'll start a big painting. Friday's like all energy, and it's a mess. Saturday's different, depending if it's UGA football season or not. But Saturday's different. And I start to sit down and refine a painting. Sunday, I'm sitting down and saying, I'm just doing the right eye today. It took me a couple days to slow down. So here's how it works. Rarely do I work on a painting, the same painting, 2 days in a row. You see, this has to dry. And it starts to get sticky and tacky. And if I take brush cleaner to it tomorrow, brush cleaner is a dissolvent, then I've never read this, but I sort of believe this. If I start to take brush cleaner to this tomorrow, I start to lift off something that hasn't cured completely. So it takes paint anywhere from a day to 3 or 4 days. Are you laughing at something you might have done? Are you laughing at you or are you listening to something? You're working, never mind. Okay, so what happens is when I paint on something on Friday, I don't work on it till next Friday. And what I work on Saturday, I don't work on it till next Saturday. And eventually Saturday becomes a Sunday painting because it's now finishing. And Sunday's my little detail things. And then I don't work on it till next Sunday. Does that make sense? I give it a chance to dry, cure, and seal. Now, how long does paint take to dry? Yeah, 100 years. A year to varnish. 6 months minimum to varnish. So it's wiggling, folks. And if you're putting some of this stuff over the wiggling,
it's cracking.
you're going to see cracks on top. There's a lady in the day class did a wonderful job with this painting, and it was the 3 Boats by Sargent, and she was learning that, you know, she could just thin her paint out and be more in control of the value. And it was like 3 weeks later, she had cracks all over her canvas. Brand new painting. This is real. So fat over lean is not just using different oils over oils. My wife doesn't want to know the chemistry. She doesn't want to know if barite dries faster than other products and what's the order of which oils that dry fastest, you know, things like that. So I have a marker, large giant black magic marker, and I write on her tubes of paint 1, 2, 3, 4. She doesn't have to use tube 1 first. She can use tube 2, but she can't put 1 over 2. And it goes all the way to 5. And she's good with that. And I think some of you might be good with that and want that list. That's too funny. We're not talking that yet. We will talk about that. We're just talking about just straight out of the tube watch it. Okay, my 4-minute talk is up. Make sense? Scary, huh? Habits. Habits that may not be good. What now? Oh no, I do thin a paint, but to do that, I have to add something that has oil that comes from the store. So there are many products that I add to my paint to thin it with, but never brush cleaner or just thinning it out is not an option. But I didn't want to make this a 2-hour talk and get too confusing. One talk, that's all it is. Watch how thin you make that paint. You can do it on day 1. Be careful on day 2, and I guarantee you day 3 is probably off the chart. But you're going to have to watch the proportion yourself. You have to look at the thickness of your paint and say, does this look a little thicker than that? And I'm not talking about making 1/4-inch strokes here.
It's also about loading the brush, though, right?
Having the right amount of paint or having too much in an early stage. Yeah, and then let me look at it this way. Sargent painted the Spinners, a copy by Velázquez. And in his early stage, his first coat, he was making it, you know, this was a certain brown, and then this area here, he thinned it out, and now it was a different color. And he thinned his paint out day 1, and he did it the right color and left it. He didn't have to fix it. Do you know what that means? He slowed down and looked carefully. Do you know why that's important to me? It's important to me because you have an opportunity to say, what am I experiencing today? What's happening today? And how do I carry that message? Oh, maybe these colors and this harmony of colors, and maybe this. Watch how dark this is. Watch how light this is. How sharp or soft is this edge? You know, that kind of thing. So he does thin his paint out early. Everyone does. But what if you got in the habit of doing it once and not do it to do it over again and fix? Right. Let's cut the time in half and just breathe between some of your strokes. Gosh, my hand's burning after taking the brace off. We'll skip that one. Yeah, it's nerve. What was the edit? What did I say?
You said, you know, the problem with mixing it with the palette, you know, but you meant to say brush.
Oh, the palette.
Palette.
Oh, with the brush. Yeah, yeah. Oh, I'll catch that.
Yeah,
I'll type it in.
You'll do like
now I'll look for it.
Yeah.
This makes sense?
It does, yeah.
Pretty simple, huh?
Yeah.
What do you want?
What color to?
Yellow ochre lightly.
Yellow ochre lightly. Okay.
Whenever the painting's about more than one color, green, blue, and purple, it's always yellow ochre.
Okay.
And I'm talking about yellow ochre. Do you see the HRE on ochre way at the top?
In the middle.
The second to the right,
Okay.
it says yellow ochre. Do you see the last 3 letters? That area underneath it is yellow ochre light.
Yes.
To the left is too dark. It has to look white.
Okay. Okay.
And then you draw it in lightly.
Okay. Another. Is this project for color?
Yeah, not easy either. It's
Yeah,
transparent.
and,
We're going to do the green trees first because you already know that.
Yeah, and then far away. And
More
gray.
blue. These are the same trees. Farther away, they have more blue in it.
And is there any path here, or I need?
Yeah, you'll always have a path.
So I have to
Thank you for everything you do for the rest of your life. But you choose the path.